So somebody wrote in. They said, "Hi, my name is." I'm not going to bother saying that. Not that we have the last name, but my daughter is 7 and was diagnosed with level 5 high functioning autism. What I can't explain to people is she full blown autistic or mild?
So I have never heard level 5 autism.
Okay,
I don't know
I
what
just
that
don't
is.
know.
No, I
I
don't
don't
know
know
what
that
that
either.
is. I know that's an error because I diagnose kids, and that is not a thing. There are 3 levels, and the levels have to do with the amount of help the individual needs. And the levels pertain to 2 areas. So the first area that the levels pertain to are social communication, and the second area is the restricted repetitive behaviors.
Do you think they added the numbers to get to a
It's
5?
possible. Maybe somebody made that mistake. It's possible. So when you diagnose, and this was kind of one of the funny things when I was giving the diagnostic lecture, but when you diagnose, you basically will say autism spectrum disorder, and then you don't even mention the levels. You just say, so level 1 means they require support in the area of social communication or requires support in the area of restricted repetitive behaviors. Level 2 is they require, I think, some support.
Okay.
And level 3 is they require significant support.
Okay.
So the diagnostic is actually written that way. It'll say this individual has autism spectrum disorder requiring some support in the area of social communication and significant support in the area of restricted repetitive behaviors. That in numbers would mean that there are 2 in the area of social communication and there are 3. So the higher the number, the more serious, the more severe. But you don't even mention the numbers in the diagnosis itself. You specifically just say requiring support, requiring some support, or requiring significant support in each of those areas. So this level 5, I have no idea what that means. It must be a mistake. High functioning autism, generally speaking, we talk about high functioning autism when there's a certain amount of communication. Like in my mind, what a high functioning individual would be is that there's communication is there's some basic speech and language. We're still missing, like, let's say, advanced pragmatic language. And there's not a whole lot of the restricted repetitive behaviors. That would be someone high functioning is someone who's like a 1-1. Like basically they don't need a whole lot of support. And what you can explain to people is that it is sort of the higher end of the spectrum. In the commonality with people who are very high functioning and just being on the spectrum, the reason they're on the spectrum is because they still have problem with social behavior. So these would be things like they don't really understand when they're standing too close to someone or talking about their own subject all the time, or they don't know how to enter a conversation and not dominate it. They don't know how to take someone else's perspective and understand how other people feel. Those are the areas that are most affected when you have a high functioning individual.
I wonder, so much of, I think in the beginning of autism, what I hear from parents and what I've certainly experienced is that we want to know where our kids are in the realm
Sure.
of things. I've talked before about the fact that skills gives the best snapshot
I
of
think
anything
so
I've come
too.
across.
Right.
And if you really want to know and understand where your kiddo is, taking that assessment in skills, and it's probably a 2 to 3 week commitment of time on a regular
Yes.
basis, not 8 hours a day, but you do a certain amount of it, and then you kind of get a belly full of it and have to walk away from it for a while and come back. But I think of it as an investment in ourselves, our family, and our kids.
Right.
That's so helpful and useful. And then at the end, you get a visual printout that shows a bunch of different skills, like every important skill, and it shows where your child is at this point in time, what the norm is for their age,
Right.
and then as your child learns things, it shows what your child has gained and how much closer it's getting. It's the best thing.
Right.
But that would tell you where your child is. Because I feel like we all want to know, so what level? I think parents are asking, so what level?
I
We've heard
know.
the numbers. Is he a 1? Is he a 2? In my day, one of the first questions I asked when I was told autism in conjunction with my son was, well, is it Asperger's? You know,
Right,
because you're
right,
hoping for,
right.
tell me how capable is he going to be? So I think that that's the best thing to do if you're a parent and you want to know.
I
Then
agree.
there's that whole thing of explaining it to other people. Everything
Right.
from your mother-in-law to the kindergarten teacher to the person who you're in line with at the bank who's watching your child meltdown, who goes, why is your child misbehaving? It's knowing what you
To
can
say to others, yeah.
to others.
Right.
And I don't know what, I'd love to hear your advice on this. I think it's so personal.
It's very personal, yeah. I think, and it's you're giving me a different perspective, obviously, because I haven't lived through that process of like explaining to people what it actually means, because you have your child with you and they're wondering why they're behaving a certain way, for instance. I think it's a matter of, what I always tell parents is, don't worry about the diagnostic label. Let's not focus on that. Although I have to say, I'm one of the first people, if you remember when DSM-5 came out and people hated it, I liked it.
Yes.
I was like, I actually like this because it's the first time it gives us severity levels. It's the first time it describes it much better than it did before.
Yeah.
DSM-4 was very like, this or this, it was very like, it almost made it feel like it's a different thing if you have PDD, NOS versus autism.
Right.
And it's not, it's a continual spectrum. But so I think the more important thing, instead of like using labels like Asperger's or ASD or severity levels, is just to describe the issues the person has. The only value of having a diagnosis is two things to me. One is when you have a diagnosis, you automatically are referred to the right type of treatment. I wouldn't be able to give you an antibiotic if I didn't know that you have a bacterial infection. So the diagnosis helps with determining, hey, you got autism, okay, ABA, versus something else. So that is a good thing about the diagnosis. And the second thing with the diagnosis, obviously, is that you get funding, right, with the diagnosis. That's it. That's the only value. The rest is just about looking at your child's deficit areas and building them. That's all it is. And if your child has challenging behavior, always remember that's a side effect. That's not part of the symptoms. It's a side effect of not being able to communicate their issues at any level. And I'm not just talking about autism. I'm talking about teenagers who have meltdowns and challenging behavior. It's because they're not getting their point across, and the society or environment around them is not reinforcing for them. And if you can change that, if you can set up a system for your child at whatever level where they can express themselves however, and they can receive a fair amount of reinforcement, then they won't have challenging behavior. It's really that simple.
Yeah.
So that's it. With autism, I think it's really important for all of us just to, like, if the child's having a tantrum, it's important to be able to tell other people it's because he thinks that's the way to communicate something he's not happy about. He's not able to communicate it differently. That's, I think, the biggest point.
And as I'm thinking about it, what the words that we use, of course, has changed over the years with our son, because our kids change.
Right.
And the world changes.
Right.
And our perceptions of things change. So, I think finding the set thing to say maybe isn't the thing to do, but I think what's been successful for us over the years is when we have said, here's what we're working on.
Right.
Not even said the diagnosis. I don't say the diagnosis anymore to very many people, but we'll say, oh, we're working on this.
Yeah.
Then we can be in the hallway, and
right.
if he's just spatially, I'll say, oh, we're working on personal space, as he walks
right.
by and cuts something
right.
off. And
right.
we'll go, oh, we're working on that.
Right,
Like,
right, exactly, absolutely.
Whatever,
absolutely.
But it's personal. It's personal.
Oh,
it's
personal, very
personal.
personal.
To our kids and individual to us, and
absolutely.
And I find more and more I have to morph what I say out of respect for my son.
No doubt. But Shannon, it's a much more accepting world.
Yes.
I mean, it is such an accepting world now. Yes, thank goodness, absolutely. I mean, I remember, I don't know what was happening, I don't remember now, something in the last couple of weeks took me back to the 70s when I entered this world. I don't remember what it was. Something happened and we started talking. I think I had a meeting with some people at Columbia and we were talking about the history. And I was just thinking to myself, my God, things have changed. Like, I mean, I actually went through a phase in the late 70s where parents were afraid when they came to you. It was almost like the first hour they were trying to convince us that they were not cold parents, because that was, that was the whole thing back then. And it was like, it was an offshoot, we always say it was Bettelheim alone, but it wasn't. It was an offshoot of this whole thing called schizophrenogenic mother, which was like, in the old days, people thought schizophrenia develops from that as well. And then, of course, Bettelheim came and said it's got to have something, autism also has something to do with the cold mother or the refrigerator mother. And can you believe that's where we started? Like, it's crazy, and we've come a far way with understanding autism. Not far enough. We still don't know what causes it in most cases and so on. But nevertheless, because the prevalence is so high, we have now become much more accepting. People just don't, in general, I think the US over the past decade has become very accepting of choices and of just differences. I think that's amazing.
We're all learning and growing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's important. I want to take a short break, and then I want to come back and get another question. So stick with us. We're going to be back with more Ask Dr. Doreen after these messages.
Hi guys, welcome back to Smarty. Today I have a special guest with me. What the heck? She's missing!
Here I am!
And what's your name?
Mackenzie.
And what are we doing today?
Making sidewalk.
And how do we do that?
I have no idea.
So, the materials we'll be needing
are 2 cups of cornstarch, 1 cup of cold water, 4.5 cups of boiling water. Be careful. A mixing bowl, a spoon, sparkle, and food.
So, the first step we're going to do is we're going to take our 2 cups of cornstarch and put it in the big bowl.
Yes.
Can you do that for me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry.
It's alright, I'll help you. Step 2, you're going to put the cold water into the bowl.
Cold water.
Good job. Step 3, we're going to stir it with a big spoon. Good job. We're going to keep stirring it until it's all the way mixed together. So the next step is adding the boiling water. That's a little dangerous for her, so I'll be doing it myself, 1 cup at a time, stirring it together. You're going to keep an eye on me?
Yes.
So once we're done stirring the cornstarch water, we're going to start making our dyed paste. So what are we going to do?
We're going to put in the dye.
Okay.
And we're going to put it in the sparkle.
All right, let's do it. Move this out of the way. All right. It's all you, Mackenzie. So the more food coloring you use, the brighter it's going to be.
Ooh.
So let's put the sparkles in.
Now we're going to put the cornstarch in the jar.
All right, do you want to stir that up?
It looks pretty. We're going to make a few more colors and we're going to go pale side.
See all the colors in the sky tonight.
Are you excited?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it.
Love is the truest state of mind. Now can you see me? Can you see me? Can you see me flying by your side?
Welcome back to Autism Live and to Ask Dr. Doreen. We're here with Dr. Doreen Grant-Boucher. It's just my favorite time of the week. We get to, I'm sorry, but we get to like take some of your energy, and I know you need it for all the things that you're doing, but it's just a fabulous thing to be able to hear your mind and to know that there are people like you are working on helping our kids. Is just everything.
Thank you so
Just
much.
everything.
Thank you.
So Dr. Grant-Boucher is answering your questions in real time. You can still be writing them in on autism-live.com. Somebody wrote in and said, I have a boy of 5 years old. He's diagnosed with autism. He's verbal. His main problem is that his concentration is very poor. It takes too much time for him to finish any word. So how can we increase his concentration?
Right. So there's a lot in that question. I'm going to try to divide it. First, what I would do in this case would be to assess a little bit more and find out, is his concentration poor across the board? Is it poor in certain tasks? That's really important, because if it's across the board, no matter what the task is, then I know there's something going on with his mind and his ability to focus on anything. And then that would lead me to a certain number of exercises that have to do with focusing on different things, which I'll talk about in a minute. But if it's about specific things, like words perhaps, or just visual things, or just auditory things, or just, let's say, letter related or number related, then I know that it has something to do with that particular stimulus, and then I would work on things differently. Let me just give some examples. So if it's, let's say, about writing things, then it could also be a fine motor issue with the child and being able to write, or hold a pen. It could also be a hand-eye coordination type issue. It could also be a visual issue on itself. So I have to find out what it is that he's having a problem with, and then work on that specific thing. So let's assume that it is across the board, I don't know, and then we're trying to help the child with mental activities, I guess, that would help him concentrate better. There's a lot of different things you could do. You would take a baseline of the amount of time that he is able to focus, just so you figure out exactly how long is he able to focus and when does he lose his focus. At which point I would gradually shape that. So like, let's say he can focus for 10 seconds and you reward him at 10 seconds, and then you gradually will have him focus on something for 15 seconds, and then you reward that, 20 seconds, and you reward that, and so on. Another aspect so that's shaping up his focus. Another aspect of this whole thing is to consider, does he have a comorbid diagnosis of ADHD? I mean, not being able to focus has a lot, sometimes it's just a biochemical thing with our kids where they actually would benefit from a stimulant, and that would allow them to focus a little bit better. So I'd want to assess that. Another thing is, what are the environmental things that are distracting him? Is he better focused if he's under certain environmental conditions? Like, let's say a lot of my kids focus poorly if they're sitting in the back of the class and there's windows around them, or there's a different sound that they can hear that we can't hear. Like, this type of light has sound. You and I can focus no problem because we can't even hear this. But our kids get distracted because that sound is actually pretty loud for them. Or if they're sitting near light, they might be distracted to look at the light. There's a ton of things. So you have to kind of, basically what I'm saying is, you need much more assessment of the situation before you can pick the right treatment. You have to determine what's going on in the environment, what is the stimulus that he can't focus on, how does his mind work, how does his senses work, and then you put all that together and decide which direction to go.
I think one of the most fascinating things that has helped our family and helped me personally is that when Jen was diagnosed with autism, one of the first people that talked to me about it, and I said, I just don't understand what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a neurological difference, but what is it? What's
Right.
happening? And they said one of the theories is about them not being able to inhibit, that all of the inputs are coming in all at the same time. And
Right.
imagine if you were standing there and 32 people were talking to you at the same time.
Exactly.
You shut down.
Totally.
And I went, oh, okay, I suffer from this.
Oh, yeah.
I have a trouble editing. And they said, oh, good, well then you'll figure it out for yourself, and then I'm still figuring it out for myself.
Absolutely.
But Skills has a whole section on inhibition. Now,
Yes.
I thought that was about, people taking their clothes off. It's not. It's
No.
about inhibiting your responses to things.
Mm-hmm.
It's why I'm late, because instead of inhibiting my response to the phone ringing when I'm supposed to be out the door, I go over and pick it up instead.
Sure.
I'm not inhibiting that.
Right.
And so I don't get to my goals.
Totally.
And that opened up my mind to look at so many things and so different. And so when we talk about autism sometimes being a gift, and people go,
Yes.
how can it be a gift?
Right.
Because when we take the time to look at something, we learn more about ourselves. When we say a gift in some respects, that's what I mean. I've learned so much about the way my brain works and how different that is than the way your brain works, and how different that is from the way everyone else's brain works.
Right.
And I do think that the lessons about inhibition and skills are great for all of us. And as a parent and as a caregiver, to kind of look at and think about, put it through your own meter. It's going to be different than your child's meter, but to begin to understand,
Yeah.
if I know if I go someplace and there's 32 things happening at once, afterwards I am exhausted.
Totally right.
And I can't process.
That's right. And so, and you're able to not only describe that, but you're aware of it, right? I mean, so you notice that in yourself. So with our kids, they grow up this way. They don't know any different, and they don't know that, it's not meant to be this way. So they can't describe it because they don't know how to even describe something, because it's their state of being.
Right.
So, and they just physiologically react to it, like, okay, I'm going to shut everything out because it's just overwhelming. And then for us to try to go in and say, hey, shut this part out, but leave that part, focus on language, focus on the instrument, but leave all the outside noise away. It's a very hard thing. And that's why I think behaviorally, you don't go in cognitively and tell, you don't go and say, okay, shut that out, shut up, but focus. You actually just reinforce the focus on the right stimulus. It's called saliency. And you will reinforce continuously. And that's what is important for this family. It's like, is it actually that he has a hard time with just words? If it is, then focus on that. Or is it that he has a hard time with everything? In which case, we need to focus on some mind activities that help him focus.
But for instance, I think about in Christina Adams' book, A Real Boy, they always played music during dinner. And they would get meltdowns. And there's one point when a friend comes over and is sitting there, and I think there's something else noise in the background, like there's a TV in the background, and there's music playing, and they're trying to get him to eat, and the friend goes, I would lose my mind.
Yes.
Why don't you turn stuff off?
Right.
What you want him to do is to eat. Why don't you turn the other
things
stuff
off?
And sometimes we've gotten used to it. We don't realize.
We just don't.
All the different things that are going on that somebody's having to combat to do the one skill you're trying to get them to do.
Absolutely. And it's really funny, the other side of this, my husband, I'm one of those people that cannot sleep if there's noise in the room. I have to have everything turned off, honestly, otherwise I will just focus on the noise. But he's the exact opposite. He likes TV on, he likes to fall asleep to background noise. And he said, and I tell him, I'm like, how do you do this? And he's like, I just can't be left alone with the thoughts in my head. I need to have something that distracts me. And so it's interesting though when he says that, because I think that's part of also what goes on with our kids is it's a mishmash of external and internal, and it's all just too much for them. And so, they can't describe it. But it is interfering with the thoughts in their head as well. And we just don't know how much of it there is. I only learned all this from our recovered kids, who come to me and say, oh, the sound of, I will never forget Andy, one of my kids, Andy, told me, it's just that certain sounds, like the door opening and closing, was the most hilarious sound. For some reason, every time I heard a door open and close, I'd crack up and start laughing. But language was a really hard sound for me to hear. It was just in the background, and I had to really focus on it. It's very interesting.
So interesting. It's one of the reasons why our Recovered Kids is such a great resource.
Oh, they're just amazing.
It's a wonderful thing. All right, I want to ask a quick question here. Is there a program in Fort Myers, Florida for a 19-year-old boy with Asperger's to get help with a job and self-help?
Honestly, I don't know the area well enough to be able to advise on that. Who would know, Ascard, about Florida and the Fort Myers area? The only person I can think of is our expansion department, John Galley's group. Yeah, maybe we can ask around and try to see what programs are out there. There's I guess an online program called Love My Provider, and they tend that their job is to have providers listed on their website. So look up Love My Provider, because what they have is providers of different services for individuals with autism all over the country. So hopefully they've hit Florida and they have a lot of connections in Florida. I'm pretty sure they're all over the country now. So it would be good to look at Love My Provider too and see what they suggest.
You know, we always say here at Autism Live, if you see a need, fill it. So if it's not there, you might have to create it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that could be a journey for you.
Absolutely.
An interesting journey.
Totally.
Not an easy one, but a worthwhile one.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll look into it, and you look into it, and let's reconvene. We'll meet with you next week. All right, we're going to take a short break, and we're going to be back with more Ask Dr. Doreen after these messages. Stick with us.
Our twins, Justin and Jessica, were premature babies, so we always were very conscientious of their development. But I think it was probably 15 months, Justin started getting really obsessive compulsive with opening and closing doors. And Justin started tantruming a lot too. These would be major tantrums that were just completely debilitating to the family.
Having to take them out of the house, put them in the car, drive around, just to calm them down.
Yeah, I remember a breaking point and just thinking, you know what, we got to do something. This is not right. Once we were on the track to getting a diagnosis for autism, we started sharing that with our close friends and family. It just so happens that somebody from our older daughter's private school called us out of the blue. She introduced herself and she says, I know that recovery is possible. Those words so early in our journey were a guiding force for us. As we got more educated in knowing what is effective therapies for kids with autism, we realized quality ABA is vital to that progress. That's where we decided that CARD was the right provider for us and for our son.